I'm just going to cross now to Sophy Ridge. And Sophie, as I said, there's been reaction now coming in from global leaders. There's also been a reaction from Westminster.
There has been, Yalda. And look, to be frank with you, the UK government have been keen to stay as far away from this as possible. For them. Yes, they know that inevitably they are seen as a key ally of the US. They don't want to say that they disagree with the actions, which is why, for example, that they've been saying that they agree with Donald Trump that Iran needs to stop developing a nuclear weapon. But they are very, very cautious and they want to, if at all possible, not get dragged into what they see as a conflict that is escalating. We have had some reaction to the attacks from the Defence Minister, Luke Pollard.
The MOD's #1 priority has been the protection of our people and our bases in the region. Working alongside the Chief of Defence Staff, ministers have directed commanders to take all necessary measures to protect our servicemen and women. Force protection now is at its highest state across all deployed units in the Middle East. The additional RAF Typhoon jets announced by the Prime Minister have now arrived in the region to reinforce our posture, deter threats and reassure our partners.
Luke Pollard speaking away there. Well, let's get a bit more analysis on where this all leaves the UK. We've got Sky's Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, with us. Sam, what do you make of how Keir Starmer and the Cabinet have been reacting?
So you can see them walking this tightrope. It's a tightrope that sees the Prime Minister and ministers back the ends. They agree with the US that Iran should not get nuclear weapons, but does not explicitly back the means, leaving open much conjecture that actually the UK private legal advice to the government is that this is not a legal conflict and therefore the UK cannot join in and cannot allow its assets to be used, particularly Diego Garcia, as part of this military effort by the US. And so you have this sort of slightly weird messaging. When David Lammy appeared in the Commons earlier, he was at pains to say that the UK is not involved in this conflict. But at the same time, ministers do not want to look like they're going to be caught short-footed. So I just want to play you, first of all, a little bit of that Defence Minister Luke Pollard, who was talking a little bit later about what would happen if, for instance, UK interests were threatened.
And I want to be clear, we will not rule out sending further capabilities if they are required. And we will take all steps necessary to protect our people and our assets.
And I think the point of that is to sound like they are kind of on the front foot, but I'm not expecting the UK to actively participate in anything. In fact, you know, when messaging where the UK stands, the idea that Britain is not involved is quite high up, and we heard that time and again from David Lammy. Where the UK is heavily involved is trying to protect UK citizens, particularly those who are in Israel. You have some in Iran, for instance, who are very hard to find, but there is a big effort underway to start to evacuate, initially the most vulnerable. Here's David Lammy.
I can confirm to the House that a Royal Air Force A400 has flown in to Tel Aviv and taken 63 British nationals and their dependents to Cyprus, from where they will be brought home this evening. Further flights will follow in the coming days, security allowing. There are just over 4,000 British nationals that have registered their interests following our appeal last week, and we would estimate that somewhere between 15 to 25% of them indicate, this is following the pattern in previous crises in Israel and in the region, take up the offer of British assistance to leave.
Well, let's discuss this a bit further. We can bring in Sky Security and Defence Analyst, Professor Michael Clark, joining myself and Sam Coates as well. Just firstly, before we talk a bit more about the UK involvement, how serious is the situation now?
None of this helps, but from a military perspective, there's a lot of sound and fury indicating not very much, because Al Udeid, the base in Doha that was attacked, or base just west of Doha, is symbolically very important. It's America's biggest base in the Middle East, 8,000 American personnel. There used to be 10,000, it's about 8,000 now. It houses the biggest air wing in the world, the 379th, the Expeditionary Air Wing, a lot of aircraft. It's called a CAOC Centre, which is a communication and airborne control centre. And it is America's main base for CENTCOM, Central Command. So it ticks lots of boxes as being the centre of American power in the Middle East. It's also extremely well defended. For that reason, the Qataris can take some credit for helping in the defence, but of course the defence is mainly American. And to give advance warning means that nothing is going to get through. And if something did get through, the chances are it would hit sand, because it's a very, very big base. So it's pretty safe in a military sense to attack Al-Udeid. But of course, symbolically, you're making the move. And there's also reports, but we can't get any other details on yet, of the Ansar al-Assad base, American troop base in Iraq, also being targeted, and also no casualties. So it looks as if the Iranians have chosen a couple of targets, made sure that no damage was really caused. It's very ritualistic. And that's typical of the IRGC. The indications are that Ayatollah Khamenei is, they say, sheltering or in hiding, to you and me, and that he may have devolved decision-making to the IRGC, to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They certainly won't be passive. They're not pragmatic in the way that he tends to be pragmatic. And they will certainly want to do something. So this has got the hallmarks of the IRGC all over it, but it offers plenty of ways out, depending on how the Americans now respond.
Well, this is
Puts the ball back in Trump's court. You're going to be sensible and leave it, or you're going to go berserk again, and then we'll see where we are. That's their challenge to him.
You see, that's the thing, isn't it, though, right? If you say that this is quite carefully done by the Iranians, it's a response, so they save face. But is Donald Trump going to respond again?
We'll
I mean,
that's the challenge to him now. Is it, OK, so what are you going to do? We've made our gesture, and we reserve the right to do other things down the road, because they are absolutely incandescent by what has happened over the weekend. Incandescent. But nevertheless, their first move allows for a way out, and they're challenging him to see if he takes it.
It's interesting to see the UK's involvement in all of this, or lack of involvement, I should say, because, look, all of us remember the many, many times when the UK has been so keen to show it is an absolute lockstep with the Americans, it backs everything that they do. We are willing to show support or send troops or whatever it is. This is different.
There are three big things, I think, about events the last 7 days. The first is that Keir Starmer misread Donald Trump in interviews, including with our Beth Rigby last Tuesday. He was saying, no, Trump isn't about to escalate and fire missiles at Iran. He is wrong. The German Chancellor got it right. He was giving interviews at the same time, but Keir Starmer got it wrong. How did that failure of intelligence? They were sitting next to each other. Well, how did he get that wrong? The second thing is that clearly Trump does not feel the need to listen to the counsel of Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has been urging de-escalation, along with France and Germany, plenty of other European countries. It seems to have played no role in Trump's decision to go for it. And the third thing, I am suspicious around, or interested, should I say, around the decision by the Americans not to use and not to request Diego Garcia base be used. It's closer than where the bombers ultimately came from. It could well be the case, I wonder whether it was the case, where quietly the Americans were told by back channels that if asked, Britain would refuse to allow Diego Garcia to be used as a staging post for this conflict. And rather than create a public diplomatic rift, they just decided to go from the American base instead, which is further away, and refuel in the air. Now, if that is the case, do we think Donald Trump's going to remember or just forget and shrug it off?
I enjoyed your correction from suspicious to interested there, by the way. Do you think that is viable, that's why they didn't use Diego Garcia?
Well, I think they may have realised that it would put Britain in a difficult position, and they need Britain's support for other things, or they'd like Britain's support for other things. So why make a problem of it in this case? But also, it's a demonstration from America's point of view that they can leave their base at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri and fly anywhere in the world and drop bombs and fly back again. They don't need foreign bases. And that's one of the things about the B-2, is that it is a global bomber with refuelling. And it was a demonstration of that as well. And they also took the opportunity to send some B-2s to Guam. They said as a distraction exercise, but it wasn't really distraction. It was to show the Chinese we can do that as well.
I guess that's the thing. How needed is the UK in all of this? We've been talking an awful lot about how the US might respond here. And really, you know, as we were just saying, the ball is in Donald Trump's court. Let's bring in Mark Stone now, shall we, from Washington. Mark, I guess that is the big questions over to the US.
Yes, we know Donald Trump's been in the Situation Room. He was in there at 1 o'clock. He would have seen the images unfold over the night sky of Doha. It became clear quite quickly from US officials that there have been no injuries or deaths as a consequence of the Iranian attack on Al Udeid Air Base. We also now have growing levels of confirmation that there was some coordination done, certainly between the Iranians and the Qataris. Remember, the Iranians and the Qataris are relatively close. There is it has a pretty unique position in the sense that, and we've been talking about Qatar in the context of Hamas and Gaza. They talk to all sorts of different people on different sides. And there was, we understand, coordination between the Qataris and the Iranians before this attack took place. If the Americans weren't involved in that coordination, and what I'm being told is that they were, and we know that Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy for Trump, has been indirectly talking to the Iranians. Even if they weren't directly in contact, then of course the Qataris would have told them. So all the preparations were in place to be able to counter this Iranian attack, and that there on the screen is the counter-attack. It is the Qatari and American missile defense systems over the night sky of Qatar, taking out those Iranian short and medium-range missiles that could have caused significant damage. Combine that with the fact that the Americans moved all non-essential staff out of the area. They would have had maximum force protection in place to prevent any casualties. And maybe, just maybe, the Iranians would have fired the missiles at coordinates where they knew they wouldn't actually kill Americans, because all of this is about saving face from an Iranian perspective, in the knowledge that Donald Trump said at the weekend that effectively that he would fire a missile through the Supreme Leader's window if he did anything massive. He knew that, but they needed to save face, and so a coordinated response does just that. And to use the diplomatic language, it provides for an off-ramp. So maybe a line can be drawn under this. To Michael's point as well, we also now know that the Americans believe no missiles were fired at the Al-Assad air base in Anbar province outside Baghdad in Iraq. That after a claim by the Iranians through Iranian state TV that they had fired missiles into Iraq and American assets there. That appears not to be the case. There are also American air bases in Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan, where Stewart is. Again, what we're being told is that no missiles were fired there. So perhaps this is a very carefully choreographed attempt by the Iranians to be seen to hit back, but to save face at home and not to allow this to spiral again. And my sense, and certainly the reporting here in the States at the moment, is that Donald Trump is of the view that if no Americans are killed or injured in these attacks, then as far as he's concerned, that's it. He can continue with his hope, which was that Saturday night was a one-hit wonder, a night of airstrikes to take out, as he claims, Iran's nuclear capability, and then that's it. What we don't know is what the Israelis will do. They seem to be continuing with their bombing.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. We've been talking about the UK reaction to those strikes and the threat that Iranian retaliation poses to the West as well. I spoke to the former National Security Advisor and former permanent representative to NATO, Lord Peter Ricketts. I should say this interview was done in the last hour. Thank you so much for being on Sky News. It's a very fast-moving situation in Qatar and Iraq. What do we know?
I mean, it's a very dangerous and unpredictable situation. People were asking whether Iran would retaliate for that American raid. We've now got the answer. Yes. And it's been quite a wide-scale retaliation by the look of it. A number of air bases, the US air bases around the Middle East targeted. As far as we know, there haven't been casualties yet, but this is very dangerous to be firing missiles across Gulf countries in the general direction of American air bases. And therefore, I fear we're off for another spiral in the escalatory spiral. The Americans are bound to respond, I think.
I mean, there's so much to unpick here. You say that this is the answer to the question of whether or not Iran was going to retaliate in some way. if you're going to put things on the kind of scale of the retaliation, this feels like this is on the upper end, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it's perhaps a demonstration of capacity, that they may not have been intending that there would be massive damage, but to send a very clear signal that they are capable of doing more, and then report to their own publics that they've launched a very powerful attack, and perhaps hope that that's it. But it's, dangerous and unpredictable territory.
It's not going to be it, is it?
I don't think so. I think Donald Trump, having got into this, I was somewhat surprised that he did, is not going to feel he can let this pass. If they've launched missiles at several American bases, he will, I think, have to go back and do more strikes in Iran, which then puts the ball back in the Iranian court.
I mean, how serious could this get? How worried should we be?
Well, I think it is already very serious. It's spread to the wider Gulf region. There are, of course, massive economic interests at stake there, the oil installations, the Straits of Hormuz. For the moment, it looks like it's been a relatively targeted attack on American military facilities. Of course, some of them have British personnel there as well. I'm sure they'll be all, safely protecting. But the capacity for this, even if it's intended to be limited, to get out of hand by a missile miscarrying or hitting a civilian infrastructure, I mean, that's the risk. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it's intending to go much further, at least as seen from the Iranian point of view.
You say there that it's a demonstration of capacity, and I'm quite interested in that, because it felt like there had been talk about how strong Iran was. Is this a weakened state? Is it going to be unable to take part in this kind of escalation? Does this show that perhaps Iran is stronger and has more capability than people assumed?
Well, it's seriously weakened militarily by what's been happening in the last week or 10 days. Obviously, attacks on the nuclear sites, attacks on their air defences, on their military capabilities. So they are a seriously weakened nation, but they still have clearly missile stocks, drone stocks, and the Gulf is not very far away. I mean, they've been firing at Israel. That's a long way for these slow-moving drones to go. The Gulf, is very close. So they clearly have the capacity to launch a number of missiles and drones at the Gulf, yes. And, of course, the economic impact, even of doing that in a demonstration way, closing airspace, concern for citizens, that's already having an impact. So, yes, they cannot be ruled out yet as a military force.
And also, we often talk about Iran's proxies, terrorist organisations as well. Is that a tool that they could use?
Yes, I mean, Iran has been living in a state of siege, seeing all the surrounding countries as enemies for decades. They had a network of proxies, a number of them like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen have been attacked, but they have others in Iraq, for example. And this is a country that is willing to use terrorism and assassination. They're practiced at it, they're resilient. And it may be in the short term that these exchanges with America strengthens support for the regime among the population. Not necessarily in the long term, but that's what tends to happen if your country is struck, you rally behind the leaders.
That's really interesting to hear. You mentioned there about UK, people from the UK being at some of these bases. How at risk is the UK here? And we've obviously stayed out of it so far, but are we at risk?
Well, we have not been part of these attacks. That's been very clear. Indeed, David Lammy was talking to the Iranian foreign minister just the day before Trump launched his attacks. So I think the Iranians will see us as interested in continuing a discussion with them, not on the warmongering side. But all that said, there are British personnel, civilian and military, all around the Gulf. There could be collateral damage in a strike aimed at the Americans. And of course, in a deep sense, Britain is seen as an American ally. So I don't think we are completely cut off from this. I don't think it increases the direct threat to the UK itself, but it is a time of real worry when we're already, of course, also under threat from the Russians over Ukraine.
Do you think that the UK government, Keir Starmer, David Lammy, have played it right so far?
I do. I think they were right not to be involved in the attacks. I think they were right to maintain the channels to the Iranians, because at some point this fighting is going to be over, and then we have to get back to some sort of a negotiation. If we just leave Iran isolated, hostile, wounded in the Middle East, then they will go underground, literally, for a nuclear program. They'll probably leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty, lifting all international constraints on them. So we've got to avoid that, and therefore I think the British approach of saying we need to be thinking about the longer term here is right.
At the beginning of the interview, you said that you were surprised by Donald Trump's action against Iran. Just explain what you mean by that.
Well, Trump was elected as a man who ends wars and does deals. And here he is joining in another Middle East war, I think against the instincts of a lot of his own supporters. He's thrown the idea of a deal out of the window by doing this. He's been effectively manoeuvred by Netanyahu into supporting Israeli military strikes on Iran. That's not what he was elected to do. And that's a complexity that is going to have to play out in America, especially if this goes on for several rounds. People will see America is being sucked into yet another entanglement in the Middle East. And that's everything that was against what Trump stood for. So I wondered whether he would press on with the negotiating route, but in the end, Netanyahu convinced him to go into military action. Now we're seeing you can never be sure where that will lead.
OK, thank you very much.